Want to see a magic trick?
It's gone.
This one fraud can make money out of thin air. The trick's so good that it'll fool even the entire US government. In this video, we'll be going over DC Solar and what is probably the largest and most recent Ponzi scheme to date. Stick around until the end of the video to see just how he got away with it for so long, and why so many companies were so willing to be fooled by him. Hard knock life. Our rags to robbery story starts with a man named Jeff Karpoff. Jeff grew up tinkering with cars, eventually growing up with a talent for fixing cars for cheap, and that's exactly what he sold to customers. By 2002, with his now wife Paulette Amato, they established a little independent auto shop called Roverland USA. Roverland USA came after a string of failed business ventures, but third time's the charm. Roverland was a success, drawing customers in with the cheapest repair service and parts in town. Eventually, the couple would branch out into the larger market. Sadly, not many people were interested in repairs so cheap that even their mechanics were getting guilty. As the business slowly collapsed in on itself, Roverland USA closed down for good in 2007. Horrible timing considering America was in financial crisis. Thankfully for him, opportunity would come calling for him. Literally, Jeff received a call from one of his regulars at Roverland, and what he said would change his life forever. 2 words: solar panels. Praise the sun! Jeff was offered a job as a solar panel salesman that summer, a commodity that was slowly growing in popularity since sustainability became a thing. As carbon emissions got higher and gasoline prices soar, solar power is now considered to be the best source of renewable energy out there. That's because the sun isn't going anywhere, but sadly neither is your solar energy. One of the biggest problems with solar panels was the fact that solar panels were meant to be outdoors and exposed. This meant that when you install solar panels, you run the risk of losing your panels to thieves, vandals, or Mother Nature herself. Another con to solar energy was the fact that most solar energy at the time wasn't transportable. Sure, you could lug around a jerry can of gasoline, but no one can harness the power of the sun at the palm of their hand.
The power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
Enter Jeff and his ingenious idea of solar panels, but on wheels. After a patent file and some tinkering, voila! His first invention was born, and its name was Solar Eclipse. Discovery. Businesses don't run on solar power, they run on hard cash. Enter Dave Watson. Dave was a software consultant and a colleague of Jeff's, so when he caught wind of Jeff's newest invention labeled as solar power on wheels, he smelled opportunity. To Jeff, it was nothing more than a side project, but to Dave, it was the next big thing. By the end of the showcase, Dave had agreed to loan Jeff a grand total of $368,200. Pure Power Distribution was formed as a way to market Jeff's Solar Eclipse invention, and DC Solar was formed as Jeff's newest solar on wheels leasing company. Dave and his associates over at Silicon Valley offered up a lot of valuable connections in the entertainment industry. Using these connections, they were able to offer the Solar Eclipse to other Hollywood production companies, all of which were more than happy to support the greener good. Another valuable connection made at the time would be with New York businesswoman Heidi Gliboff, who was just as intrigued with the idea of solar on wheels. Green Energy Incentive. The green energy incentive goes something like this. For every dollar that you spend buying solar powered products or anything that pushed the eco agenda, the government would give you 30 cents back. So if one company spends $10,000 worth of solar equipment, the government would pay you $3,000 back. While this comes as a sincere effort by the government, most of the businessmen he'd met saw this as a way to effectively reduce their taxes by huge margins. Thus, a new product was added to DC Solar's product line: fraud. DC Solar would sell their solar on wheels product to multi-million-dollar companies as a way to inadvertently reduce their tax payment. This business proposition was enough for bigger corporations to start frothing at the mouth, but the deal would be even sweeter. Jeff not only bumped the prices up by more than 50% to increase tax deductions, he also offered a no-fuss way to settle transactions. DC Solar would sell the generators to clients, offering to take only the 30% tax deduction as payment, and the remaining 70% would be settled via lease payments. And better yet, DC Solar would handle the marketing and leasing for you. This effectively made it so that companies could just purchase tax write-offs whenever they wanted to. This was, of course, foolproof, until someone actually wanted to use the generators. Breakdown. In March 2011, Jeff would get his biggest order yet, $29 million for 192 generators, all of it to be installed and ready to run by the end of the year. This wasn't just some simple tax write-off, this was a company that wanted to become more sustainable. And when it came time to actually inspect the product, the defects were just too big to ignore. As it turns out, solar power is a much different beast compared to car repairs. Who would have guessed? Generators would break down, resorting to attached diesel backups that just defeated the purpose of going solar in the first place. The generators could handle short rentals, but long-term purchases required maintenance since the machines were so prone to breaking down. Considering long-term leases were supposed to be their bread and butter, all of the 70% advances to hundreds of generators sold for tax write-offs were now just unpayable debts. And what's worse is that if the IRS finds out there weren't any generators being used, the tax cutoffs would be disregarded altogether. Jeff and DC Solar found themselves in a hole of debt, so the only reasonable option for Jeff was dig deeper. As the company faced the threat of massive losses and being outed as frauds loomed over Jeff's and DC Solar's head, him and his accountants found what is basically an infinite money glitch. Since leases were now off the table when it came to settling past debts, their next option was an accounting loophole. The newer purchases of generators for tax write-off purposes could be funneled as lease payments of earlier purchases. With this scheme, they would not only be defrauding new and old buyers, but they'd still be letting these big corporations get away with near infinite tax write-offs whenever they wanted. Jeff had turned a somewhat legitimate business into an infinite money glitch, and he was enjoying every last second of it. In less than 3 years, he earned $174 million for the sale of almost 1,200 generators, most of which didn't even exist at all. And while the generators itself were non-existent, the tax write-offs were all too real. That's why in July 2013, an audit would come knocking on their door. The collapse. As the IRS came knocking on their door for an audit, DC Solar could do nothing else but stall the inevitable. Companies that once only worried about tax write-offs now started raising an eyebrow towards the leases they were owed. And Jeff had resorted to forging documents to prove that there were indeed leases to fund their commitments. Leases also started becoming more scarce, only amount to about 5% of their projected profits. Jeff wanted to dig himself deeper into the hole he dug for himself, securing larger deals for larger tax cutoffs, until eventually bigger names such as Geico and T-Mobile started being pushed for deals just to fund his already inflating bubble of debt. But sadly, all this would be for nothing. The IRS would still get their hands on DC Solar's books, and after a single audit, it was clear that there was something very wrong within the company. But sadly, audits were something private to investors, which is why, as the company was outright fraudulent in the eyes of the IRS, it was still clean in the eyes of its associates. This facade of innocence led to some of their biggest deals, such as a deal with the United States government for generators that never existed in the first place. The law wins. On December 18, 2018, 175 FBI agents would storm DC Solar headquarters to arrest and stop the mad parade of Jeff Karpov, successfully capturing him and seizing any assets they could find. Jeff had apparently been on his way out of the country as well, but the authorities were able to seize their passports in the nick of time. Jeff Karpov was sentenced to 30 years in prison for what is probably the biggest criminal fraud scheme in the history of California.